Okay, so the final point that we didn't get around to talking about is dogs and pigs. And this comes from Matthew 7. And I want to kind of set this up a little bit before we jump into this specific passage in Matthew 7 6. So, one of the quintessential passages on conflict resolution in the Bible is Matthew 7 3 through 5. It's the log and speck principle. And it says this: why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll be able to see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Now, I want to put this in context a little bit, and this is really important to see. So this passage is in the context of the Sermon on the Mount. So Jesus is talking about all of the different do's and don'ts of what it looks like to live a godly life. And then we come to Matthew 7, and what does he say after he lays out all these do's and don'ts? He says in Matthew 7 1, do not judge, or you too will be judged. So, as we talk about conflict resolution, as we talk about marriage, the very first step to have successful conflict resolution is not to judge, to not to look at your spouse from above, not to have a spirit of pride and say, look what you're doing and not doing. But the Bible says, do not judge, or you too will be judged. And so it's this mentality of really seeing yourself as equal to your spouse. We're all in the same need of grace as everybody else. And so step number one is not to judge. And so the second step in this process is, if you see something in your spouse that needs to change, you need to confront them, but not before you look at yourself. It's the log and speck principle. So again, the foundation of the log and speck principle is not to judge, but actually it's to look at yourself first. And then you'll be in a position to confront your spouse and to take that speck out. And even the imagery there of the log being in your own eye, it's this matter of perspective. It's not that you're sinning more, but it's a matter of perspective and you seeing your sin as greater than the sin of your spouse. Again, equating to this ground is level in the home of your marriage. And so do not judge, and then put the log and speck principle into practice. And then third, listen to what it says in verse 6. Do not give dogs what is sacred, and do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you into pieces. Guys, we have to read this in the context of, again, the Sermon on the Mount and what Jesus says, not to judge and then to confront. But then with this passage as the closing passage, and we very rarely read this along with Matthew 7 3 through 5, it actually implies, and I believe even states, that there's going to come a time in certain situations where you're confronting your spouse where it wouldn't be wise to continue to do so because they're not receiving it, because they don't have a spirit of humility, because they might not want to change, or they might not want to be confronted with the truth about themselves. Again, we have a biblical responsibility to confront, but in extreme situations where a spouse might not be ready or willing to hear the truth about them, the Bible actually says to take a step back. It would be unwise for you to continue to confront your spouse with something that they're not receiving. Again, the Bible equates it to giving dogs what is sacred and pearls to pigs, and says the result that they may trample you under their feet. And so, again, what I want you to hear is that we have a biblical responsibility to confront. And in a healthy relationship, that should be the culture in your home. And there are some situations in unhealthy relationships with unhealthy spouses where it might not be the best decision for you to confront your spouse. It might be the wisest decision for you to, in the name of love and in the name of wisdom, to take a step back from your spouse and not to confront them. And not just not confronting them, but simultaneously praying and asking God to change what you've been unsuccessful to play a part in their life. And so again, you're not stepping away from the marriage, you're stepping away from this particular area in your life, and you're giving ownership of your spouse and ownership of this issue to the Lord for him to manage and control. And so that's the spirit of dogs and pigs. And again, it's the it's the last step in the process, and that's why I felt okay with not talking about it, but at the conference, because there's more important things to talk through. But it is important enough that I wanted to record this video. And so, again, if you have questions, please reach out to a counselor. We know some of these issues can be really complex at times. But thank you so much again for attending and the workshop and trusting us to speak into your marriage, to be a voice in your marriage, and let us know how we can continue to do so. So thanks again.